Hey folks, it's Nate. Thanks for joining me at the art table again today. We're back taking another look at Battle Angel Alita. And it's been a while since we've done this. And the focus of these discussions is really going to change from comparisons between characters in the film that was produced by James Cameron and more just to what Yukito Kishiro is doing in his narrative, because we've really outstripped everything of interest that can be discussed about the characters and themes in the film versus the manga. So I really just want to wrap up the story of the manga and give my thoughts on why I think this is such a great story. And today we're going to be looking at Volume 5. This is the midway point of the series, and it's pretty important for a number of things that happen in it. This is where we really start to see consequences for things that had happened before. Now, we did kind of see that in the Motorball storyline, which was entirely a reaction to the fallout from Hugo's death. So really, this part of the story is founded, or rather, that part of the story was founded on events that had already taken place, but it was founded on them. It continued them. It didn't show us repercussions from what Alita had already done. We're going to see a lot of that in this storyline, and it covers a number of things. People maybe Alita shouldn't have trusted are going to come back into play, and some of her bad decisions are also going to come back into play. Most notably, from page 1, we are reintroduced to Zappin. And you may remember Zappin. We can kind of see him here. He's this guy with the spiky hair. Looks kind of like Guile, and he's had a new face attached to his cyber body, which right away may remind you of who he is. This is the hunter warrior that tried to take Hugo in when Hugo was running around stealing people's spines. He is not the best person, but when we were first introduced to him in the great themes of Kishiro's work, Zappin was an avatar of order. He worked for the hunter warriors, he took in people who were committing crimes, and yes, he got paid for that, and yes, he didn't like Alita very much because she was kind of stealing some of his thunder. He was a very good hunter warrior. He was not a bad person. Maybe a little petty, but petty people are everywhere and it doesn't make them bad. The problem is, of course, that he tried to arrest Hugo and Alita literally tore his face off over it. He's been recovering ever since. And he has met a young lady called Sarah. This nice 80s looking girl here. Very, very stylish, very compassionate. We really only get 2-3 pages with Sarah. And what really happens is she kind of works a charity facility. She helps feed the people who are down on their luck. I don't know if homeless is the right word for people who live in the scrapyard, because permanent structures are I mean, it's hard to call any structure in the scrapyard permanent. But she is working with the underprivileged, let's put it that way. And, she kind of runs a soup kitchen. She's a very compassionate person. She seems to have won Zappin over with her very feminine grace and compassion that she has. And then there is this sequence where we see people watching motorball tournaments, and they are talking up the confrontation coming between Alita and Jishugen, which really helps us kind of place things in the timeline. Zappin sees Alita's face, and he just kind of goes bonkers. And this is one of the stranger things about this series. It's a very cyberpunk thing, and that's not surprising because Kishiro's work is very cyberpunk in flavor. Zappin freaks out because he knows that he doesn't have his original face anymore, and he just kind of snaps. He goes insane. He throws a tantrum. And in the process of running around and screaming, Sarah tries to get him to calm down, and he accidentally knocks her head off, literally, because Zappin is in an uber powerful cyber body and Sarah is a normal person. This is just one of the hazards that kind of exists when you have these extremely high-spec combat machines going around in normal human society. And the brains in those machines are not exactly sane. I find, right off the bat, I should note that I find all of Zappin's behavior in this storyline a little sketchy. He just has no rationality to him at all. And that's not the way, typically speaking, crazy people work. Usually they are very rational, but they are reasoning from premises that have nothing to do with reality. That's what makes them really dangerous and hard to understand, when they are dangerous, at least. Certainly hard to understand, because you're not clear what their premises are, and you're never sure whether they are operating off something that's real or something that's entirely in their head. Zappin does not behave like that at all through most of this storyline. He largely behaves very erratically. Philosophically speaking, that's because he has pole shifted as far as the story's philosophy goes. Remember, Kishiro is telling a story about characters learning to balance their impulses, their chaotic nature, with their desire to be a part of society, their ordered, structured nature. Zappin started off as a hunter warrior, a person of order and structure, and now he's switched to a very chaotic character, and he's just sort of lashing out at things around him. It's very hard to build any kind of understanding for a character like that, and honestly, in this story, it's probably better to think of Zappin as a force of nature or an embodiment of an abstract concept. In this case, revenge, or what Dr. Destinova will articulate as karma. Zappin is essentially Alita's bad decisions catching up with her, and we'll see more of that as we go on. So I'm going to discuss the individual beats of this as time goes on, but right now I just wanted to say, as a character, Zappin doesn't make any sense in this storyline. He is literally just the embodiment of an idea, of revenge, of karma, of consequences coming for Alita. And all of the difficulties and hurdles that he presents to a person like Alita. And as such, he's very difficult to discuss as anything other than that abstract force, which is disappointing because that's not how we were introduced to Zappin. There is another character, Den, who we will meet later in the story, who fulfills this role much better, and we'll talk about him when we get to him. I just wanted to point out that, especially as a character who we were already introduced to as an important, fully fleshed out human being, it's kind of disappointing to see Zappin reduced to this role at this juncture in the story. In fact, I think this is one of the weaker storylines in Kishiro's original run of Battle Angel Alita. That doesn't mean this is bad. It is just a weakness that is worth bearing in mind. So we get a time skip. We fast forward 2 years. So Alita has been done with Motorball for 2 years, and we go to Bar Kansas, which is, of course, the dive bar where Alita originally met Makaku, and many other important story beats have taken place. We see that Shimura is living with Ito as Jashugen requested, and people are actually in a really good place. Our friends are all doing pretty good at the opening of this storyline. Ito is still working as a hunter warrior. We see him dressed up in his outfit over here. He's still protecting the people of Scrap Iron City. Alita has become a lounge singer. Interesting choice. She's exploring sides of her that we had no idea about before. It's very interesting to see her. It's not clear whether she was a hunter warrior at this point. We do later see her teaching a martial arts class. So she has integrated into her community in Scrap Iron City, and she has kind of found an equilibrium. She is kind of in balance right now. The problem is there are a bunch of hanging threads. The biggest one, as we just saw, was Zappin. And another one that is introduced right away here is the Berserker body. S-Doc, her motorball coach, was kind of a shady guy. And one of the things he did in order to make sure she stayed on the courses until he could prove himself, quote unquote, by raising a successful motorball player who challenged and defeated Jashugen, was he sold her old cyber body, the Berserker body, that she used in the fight against Makaku. And ever since she came back to live with Ito, they've been trying to run down the Berserker body. Now they finally have a lead. Ito is going to track it down because he's heard that the Berserker body is now in the hands of Desti Nova. Very, very shady guy. Of course, we've heard his name several times before, but this is going to be our first meeting in person. But we're not going to run down that thread right away. First, we're going to see a wrap-up of the confrontation between Alita and Zappin. not just Shugen. They both end with the same sound, different people though. And in order to go along with that, we introduce Old Man Murdoch. Murdoch is a hunter warrior, much like Ito and at one time Alita, and he uses cyber dogs. That's a pretty cool premise for a hunter warrior. It gives him good tracking ability and a lot of firepower to call on, as it were. He's got 5 sets of eyes because he's got his own and the 4 dogs. And of course, he has 4 enhanced noses as well. Alita teams up with Murdoch to hunt down Zappin. They kind of join forces, their connections, their understanding. And Murdoch turns out to be Sarah's father, so he has a personal investment in this as well. They're kind of rivals, and they're kind of cooperating. It's an interesting storyline, and it explores Alita's sense of other people, her sense of compassion, and her understanding of the importance of human relationships, which has really come a long way since she was essentially a child when Ito first found her. We also get to see some nice moments with Kiyomi, the daughter of the owner of Kansas. She's growing up. And again, her growing up kind of mirrors Alita's. They were both essentially born at the same time, but they come of age in very different, radically different ways, which is one of the interesting themes that runs through, of course, this entire story. So Alita and Murdoch catch up with Zappin by the end of the second chapter in this volume, which is really kind of surprising. You would think this would take a little bit longer, right? They confront Zappin, and Alita does something interesting. She admits that what she did to Zappin was wrong. She really shouldn't have done that. But she's going to give Zappin a chance at revenge. And I'm not entirely sure what this moment is meant for. I guess Alita doesn't really acknowledge she's done something wrong, but she acknowledges that Zappin has reason to hate her, to desire revenge, and she gives him a free shot. She sits down and she plays a tune on her little portable keyboard, and Zappin is essentially given a free shot until she finishes playing. And he tries to do something, but he freezes. And Alita says, it's cowardice that led him to freeze. I'm not sure that's clear. We don't really get a whole lot of idea what's going on in Zappin's mind. And again, this is a weakness in the story. We're not really sure why Zappin does anything that he does. But he wusses out, and Murdoch's dogs tear him apart. We jump over to Ito. He meets with Nova. There is a long discussion with Nova about who he is, what he does, why, his relationship with Typharis, things like that. We see a lot of his really horrific experiments that he does, and we learn that Nova has essentially mastered a kind of nanotechnology that he uses to perform many of the medical feats we've already seen evidence of, to help Makaku get used to his new cyber body, to do high-level neural brain rewiring on Jeshugen, things like that. And he has found the remains of Zappin's skull, and he has put his brain back together, and he's going to give this brain, which is just how he refers to Zappin, he's going to give Zappin's brain an opportunity to work out his karma. And in order to do that, he gives Zappin an opportunity to merge with the Berserker body. And so Zappin comes back a second time. After that, there is just a couple of really important parts to this story. The first is that when Zappin merges with the Berserker body, his mental instability essentially makes the Berserker chassis go haywire. Both Nova and Ito try and shut it down. However, Zappin kills both of them. The catch is, Nova has augmented himself with his nanotech, and so he can essentially come back to life no matter... It takes a lot of damage to kill Destiny Nova for good. A lot of damage. We're actually going to see things that look like dead Novas many times in the story from here, but he's very hard to keep down. The same is not true of Ito. Ito winds up dead-ish because while he doesn't have Nova's healing tech installed in him, Nova tells Alita he can still fix Ito. And Alita does come looking for Ito when he doesn't come home initially. So she goes to Nova's lab, and Nova tells him, I can... literally, he shows Alita a box and says, Ito's in here. And it's a very small box. There's not a whole lot of him left. And he says, Nova says, well, I can fix him. Or more accurately, Alita snaps, kills Nova and his henchmen. And then when they get better, he explains that, he can do the same thing for Ito. So the price for that is Alita has to take out Zappin. And he gives her a couple of weapons that he's created as sort of an anti-berserker formula. He studied the internal structures of the berserker enough that he was able to custom build nanotech to shut it down. He gives that to Alita, and she has to go and confront Zappin. And in confronting Zappin, she is essentially confronting her two major mistakes in the series. Her attacking Zappin in order to keep Hugo, who was a criminal, free, and her very, very careless behavior towards the berserker body. Zappin wipes out most of Scrap Iron City that Alita is familiar with. He destroys Bar Kansas. He kills not only Ito, but some of Ito's close friends. He almost kills Kiyomi and the owner of Bar Kansas. He does a lot of stuff that he could only do because Alita made these bad decisions, and essentially these two bad decisions met at Nova's laboratory. Alita does bear a lot of responsibility for this, and people turn on her because that's kind of obvious to them. It's not great. In fact, the chapter where people tell her, you got to get out of town and you got to deal with this mess you've made is called Scapegoat, because they are kind of scapegoating all of this stuff on Alita. Some of this is Zappin's responsibility, after all. He is a living person with free will, or something that approaches free will, whatever there exists in Kishiro's world. That's an interesting question, and in fact, a scientific question that drives Nova to do all the things he does. More on that later. But Zappin himself, again, in this story, is really just a force of nature. He is Alita's karma, and not so much an individual in and of himself. And that's really what I think makes the last couple of chapters in this story kind of weak. He's clearly very spiteful towards Alita, but it's hard to tell exactly why. Yes, she hurt him, but medical tech in Kishiro's world is so highly advanced that it wasn't really a permanent injury. I understand that there's some psychological scarring, and maybe Zappin never worked that out. Maybe Sarah was trying to help him balance that out. But what exactly caused him to fixate on Alita, and then why he was so destructive to everything else in the world around him when Alita should have been his one logical target? I mean, again, we're supposed to believe that Zappin is insane. In fact, he has a moment of clarity before his death where he actually characterizes his behavior as insane. The problem is, as I said before, crazy people are operating rationally from premises that have nothing to do with reality. They're not just doing whatever. And we see a fair amount of that from Zappin in these last two chapters. And I think it robs him of some of his impact. And it makes his final death, which is supposed to be poignant, I think, in much the way that Makaku's was, really robs it of a lot of its power. What does work is this ending scene where Alita sees the sweet pea. Ito gave her some sweet pea seeds as a reminder of fond memories. Apparently that's what they mean in the language of flowers, because flowers, apparently in florist shops, all flowers have a meaning. I'm not really an expert on that, but it's something they went with for this story at the very least. Professional florists could probably tell you whether that's true overall. And it's poignant because it is kind of a capstone on Alita's journey to this point. She has met all these people. She has made a lot of fond memories with them. And this is her last chance to look back on them. And really, in a lot of ways, this series is kind of bookending itself. When Alita is done with a battle, she has torn up her cyber body, which is a pretty common occurrence, admittedly. She has one arm and her torso left. And if you think back to the Makaku fight, that's pretty much where she was after her first confrontation with Makaku. That was a really major inflection point in her life, where she went from being just a normal girl to a hunter-warrior. And she's about to undergo a similar inflection point here that cuts her off from the family she has built up and really changes who and what she is. Up until this point, Alita has been getting a grip on her impulses and her desires. She's kind of balanced them, but when the karma from her bad decisions caught up to her, she was knocked out of that place of balance. And now she has to dive into the cold and unforgiving world of absolute structure. There's nobody left, no Doc Ito, no Desti Nova, to put Alita back together again. So in this place of extreme fatigue, extreme damage, where all her cyber body's internal systems are failing, who's going to come along and help her get back on her feet? Who's going to give the angel her wings back? Well, obviously, it's going to be the city in the heavens, ain't it? Yes, from here on out, Zalem takes a role in the story. And that's when things get really interesting. But more on that next time. In the meantime, let me know what you think down in the comments below. There's a like button and a subscribe button down there. You can use those as you see fit. And I'll talk to you later.